Oh, fantastic.
That one didn't make Tim laugh, though.
No,
Or Tim's
no.
doing something else.
Well, it was about him.
I've heard it before.
Alrighty. Good morning, good afternoon, and good day. Welcome to another edition of the Digital Download, which is the longest running weekly business talk show on LinkedIn Live, now globally syndicated on the IBGN radio network. Today, we're solving, yes, solving the generational clash in the workplace. We have a special guest, Joanna Walker, to help us do just that. Founder of Point HR Consulting, Joanna brings a wealth of experience in corporate HR, specializing in strategic talent acquisition and development. But before we bring Joanna on, let's go around and introduce everyone. And while we're doing that, why don't you in the audience reach out to a friend, ping them, and have them join us? We strive to make the digital download an interactive experience, so audience participation is highly encouraged. Okay, with that, introductions. Adam, would you kick us off, please?
I'm Adam Gray, as you can see. I'm co-founder of DLA Ignite, and delighted to be here, the first show of the year. In fact, my first live podcast, in fact, my first video anything of the year. So very exciting for me.
Excellent, welcome. Tracy.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tracy Borson from TLB Coaching and Events, where I haven't come up with something that I really like. We're about marketing, marketing that works.
So the marketer needs to come up with something marketing-y.
Do they? This is the
Yeah.
thing. I
Fair
want
enough.
to challenge the status quo on what is marketing. So we create marketing programs that really work for people. I'm a proud DLA Ignite partner, and this is my first live of the year as well. So I'm excited I can be here because I can't always
Excellent.
be here if Nicholas is at school.
Before we move on, let's say hi to Andrew. Good morning, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew.
Did he wave back, I wonder?
Of course he did.
Good.
Alex, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone, and a happy new year. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and
Yes.
clear.
Oh, good. I just see a black tile where my face should be. So I think I'm having some connectivity issues. But anyway, happy new year, everybody. Great to be here. My name's Alex Abbott, also known as the Bearded Sales Guy. And I, too, am a proud partner of DLA Ignite.
Excellent. Thank you. Welcome. And Tim.
Last and no means least, my name's Tim Hughes. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite, and I'm famous for writing the book Social Selling Techniques to Influence Powers and Change Makers. Happy New Year to everybody.
Excellent.
Happy
Thank
new
you.
year.
And myself, I am Rob Durant. I am founder of Flywheel Results, a proud DLA Ignite partner, and we help startups scale. All right. So, as I said, this week on the Digital Download, we'll speak with Joanna Walker. Joanna's expertise in bridging the gap between academia and industry offers a unique perspective on nurturing the next generation of professionals. Her insights are crucial for any business leader aiming to stay ahead of the talent acquisition game. Joanna, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and chat all things, generational and campus.
There we go. So, Joanna, let's start by having you tell us a little bit more about you and how you got here.
Sure. Well, Happy New Year and excited
Happy
to
New
be
Year.
here. And so I have been in the campus recruiting or talent acquisition space, I should say, for 13 years. And I like to say I've been in the people business for over 20, having worked with people in different functions. I started my career in outdoor education and somehow stumbled into teaching and then moved over to the recruitment space and had an awesome career, primarily working in campus recruiting and helping junior talent to find the internship and full-time roles that they want. And now I own my own consulting firm where I help companies build strategies so they can attract and retain top talent.
Excellent. All right. So let's start with the foundational question then. Why aren't more organizations doing it? And by doing it, you and I had talked earlier about building internships and co-op programs. And really, that's the key to solving this generational gap. And we'll delve into that a little bit more.
Yeah.
But let's start with that. Why aren't they doing it?
Yeah, I think companies can feel like it's overwhelming, that they're unprepared, that it's too much work. There's always this element of like, what am I supposed to do with this intern for the next 5 weeks? And there's definitely ways where we can help companies build that strategy so they don't feel that way, that this person's just showed up and they don't know what to do with them. And I think that's why companies are afraid to start. But I think once they figure out there's a lot of value in having some junior talent coming in, they start to realize they can put in some programming and that helps their pipeline overall. And so I think it's exciting for them to work with young students. And but yeah, I think it's fear, quite frankly.
Fear. So is it they simply don't know what to do?
I think, yes, it's like unprepared. They don't know how to approach schools. They don't know how to find the right person. I think companies sit there and say, oh, my friend's neighbor's kid, I can just hire them. And that's what we nicely call the friends and family program. But I think there's other ways where you can attract students who are really excited about what you do and help them learn that craft so that they become an expert in what you do. And so if they even just look at the school that might be down the road from them and think about how can I attract students, 1, 2, 3 students who might want to come in for a summer internship or even a co-op or something that might be considered a part-time job over a semester, there's a great opportunity to bring in fresh eyes and new objectives, which is what these students are. And we all know that they are a new generation, which bring in those perspectives.
Absolutely.
Hey, Rob, I have a question based on that, because I agree that students and young talent can bring in different perspectives and fresh perspectives. But do you think, Joanna, maybe that's part of the fear as well, is that we don't necessarily have a culture as a business of welcoming those different perspectives, because that is something they bring with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly in this post-COVID world, our companies are struggling with this generation. And, like every new generation, they come in with their own perspectives and thoughts, and they know how to do things better than someone else. And there's an element of that we have to work around and help them understand that there's a way that corporations operate the way that they do. And certainly perspectives are welcomed. But I do think there's an element of also this generation likes to be heard and they like to be, they like feedback. And I really appreciated that about them, is they're willing to ask hard questions, which I never would have done at that age. I was just excited to have a foot in the door. I was like, I'll do anything. And these students are coming in saying, you know what, I'm willing to really work, but I really want it to be a meaningful experience where I'm learning something that's real. And I'd like to get feedback and also offer my thoughts on that, on whatever the topics are that they're talking about. So yes, I agree with you. I think there's some of that element that can be very frustrating, and we all have to kind of learn to work together. There's 5 generations in the workplace these days. That's a lot of generations and different communication styles that we all have to operate within.
One of the things you said is that they like to be heard. I know just in general, communication gap between generations is, some will say, oh, they're not speaking on the same level. We're not even speaking on the same platforms these days, are we?
No. Yeah. Sometimes it's hard to get them to pick up the phone. We in training oftentimes would say, you can pick up this thing called the phone on your desk and call someone. You don't have to just email them or Slack or whatever channel you're using, because it's important for you to get to know these people because you work with them. And that's always an interesting conversation with them.
I do find it funny that we're referring to them as them.
Yes, they.
Students.
Which makes them inherently separate from us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On one side of the coin, I've hired my youngest son as an apprentice content creator, and that brings its own challenges. But on the other side, I had a really interesting conversation with a friend and once colleague of mine who is actually older than I am, but she's doing a role within an organization, in a smaller organization, as a sort of a partner director.
Mm-hmm.
And she was saying how much she loves being in this young, vibrant, non-hierarchical organization that is actually going somewhere. And they've built their business based on what they themselves as a business, and therefore their people, are really good at and want to be best known for. And sort of listening to this conversation that we're having, I'm thinking, but hang on, them are already employing us. Them as in them. And we're, they are probably having the same conversation about us.
Well, and I think it's even interesting because if you use the phone as an example, even in my own personal experience, I remember like entering the workforce and you use the phone. That's like what you do. And then I started working for a company where they wanted us to only use video calls. And I was like, that's so weird. That means I have to be all like fancy for every call I need to make, which I wasn't before. So then there was that shift. And now when you say you can pick up this thing called the phone, I'm like, meh. I'd much rather do a video call because for me, I feel like I can create better connection with a face. So I like that. But there was also parts of my journey where I was super uncomfortable with that. And we use this was something that I came into the conversation really wanting to talk about, is this concept of like, there's boomers and there's Gen X and there's millennials and there's Gen Zs. And my son is like a Gen A. And like, I can't hardly keep track of this anymore, but it's like, how helpful is it to look at it as us versus, not that it's versus, but us and them versus, I think organizations like you're speaking about, Alex, it like attracts a specific type of person. And I think there are people in every age demographic who want to be heard. And so there's like the people who want to be heard, but does that fit into a specific age demographic? I find it like very curious that it's the human brain loves boxes. So it's easy to box people into these categories. But I've also found I do personal branding, and I've worked with Gen Zs, I've worked with boomers, I've worked with a whole bunch of different people who want to own their personal brand because that's what they want, and it's not really dependent on their demographic. So I was wondering if there's like a mindset shift we need to make in this like separateness, but also awareness of the separateness that we need to maintain that makes this generational clash not so much of a clash. Or in your experience, what are some of the things that help kind of bridge that gap?
I think a lot of the conversations need to be internally in companies, but also with students. So I think there's an element where students need this sort of backpack to briefcase conversations. I think it's very helpful for students to have just some tools that are given to tools. I say tools, but some guidance around how to transition from being a student to being in a corporate world. And obviously internships are in all kinds of industries. Mine have always been with financial services or management consulting. And those are highly coveted, specific programs. Other companies may be more kind of like what Alex was talking about, where it's just different, maybe a startup world or things like that. But I also think having conversations internally is really important because it's helpful for everybody to understand how communication happens. I mean, that's such a big piece of how companies operate. So what is the best way to communicate? How can you communicate to what we would consider a boomer or maybe the most senior leader at the firm? And I think it's really important that they're it's not just when the interns come in, okay, let's prepare for the summer interns, which happens a lot in every firm starting in May and June. But also throughout the year, like how can we just make sure that no matter what level you are and where you are in your career journey, that the communication is working, and it's not us and them, it's we are a part of all one team, and we're all kind of appreciated for the value and the contribution that we're making, depending on what it is. Might be the most, executive to the most maybe menial tasks.
But isn't this about people who are already ensconced in an organization being open-minded enough to listen? So I'm an old person, and consequently, there's nothing that a young person can teach me, and I have all the answers, and don't you dare come in here with your no experience and tell me how to do things. And I think for a lot of people that are in their 50s and beyond, that's the kind of mindset that it's very easy to slip into.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that when I ran a design agency a few years ago, we had two people that came in as interns during what we have in this country called work experience. So in the last year at school, they go and do like 2 or 3 weeks working within a company.
Mm-hmm.
And often those people are, they go to local businesses, they go and start at the local businesses, and they end up sweeping the floor and making tea. And when these two instances, when people came into the organization, I sat down with them and I said, if you want to come here and make cups of tea and sweep the floor, we're not interested. If you think you might want to be a designer, you come and you work in the studio with other designers, and it'll be really hard work. We're not going to have you in for the school day. We're going to have you in from 8:30 till 5:30 every single day, and we'll treat you as if you're an employee. And both of those people we ended up hiring in the end when they had finished their exams. And what was really interesting is that the first of them we hired, she was sitting in the office listening to how things were beginning, and she said, "Can I have a word, please?" So I sat down with her and she said, "How on earth can you people answer the phone like that? This is what you need to say." Mm-hmm. We were like, "Oh my God, well, you can answer the phones from now on." So she started answering the phones, and customers were saying to us, "Who's this new person you've got? They're absolutely fantastic." And I think that part of this is about parking your own preconceptions and letting these people bring what they can bring, which is going to be different to what you bring. Clearly, they haven't got 40 years of working experience, but they have got a fresh perspective and a way of dealing with. Equally, we hired somebody else that seemed like they were going to be great, but there was a big disconnect. And this is the thing that kind of defaults me back to my old position. There's a big disconnect between what they considered hard work to be and what hard work really is. So, the idea that you've been at college, you've got your degree, you have a whole semester to do a project. But actually, this is the real world. You don't have a semester, you have a day, which means you need to knuckle under and get cracking and doing this. Oh, that's really stressful. Life is really stressful, unfortunately. And I think that there's, so it needs to be very much a two-way street, doesn't it, for learnings?
Mm-hmm.
I think that young people that come in, to expect them just to hit the ground running is unreasonable. It's different for you, Joanna, because you've been doing the job for, well, you're only young, so you've been doing the job for 10 years. But for most youngsters, when they come into the job, they've got no experience. So saying to them, you need to just talk to a customer, they've got no frame of reference for that. So they need coaching through that. But equally, I think the big advantage of having those people in, and businesses need to see this advantage, is that these people have no preconceptions. So they can start by saying, well, you're doing it this way. Why? Why don't you do it this way? And actually, the senior people, if they're looking to get a business benefit out of having young people in the organization, they need to be open to reinventing the wheel, don't they?
That actually leads me to a question I wanted to ask you, Joanna. It seems pretty self-evident why the student would want to participate in an internship or a co-op.
Mm-hmm.
But why would a tenured professional want to support such a program, and why would an organization want to have such a program?
Well, I think depending on the company, I think every company has opportunity for roles that differ in responsibility. So not everybody is going to do the same task forever in life, right? So I think people develop in their career. They might be promoted, they might get new responsibilities, and you have to sort of backfill some of this. And I think in looking at some of the more, what I would call junior roles, let's say like a coordinator, for example, or an assistant, or I don't know, whatever the maybe main level might be, the lowest level, those are opportunities for you to think about, how can I bring in some fresh talent who are likely very well educated, eager to learn, and want working experience. And so I think there's some opportunities in there to come in and think through the types of students that you might want who have unique experience. It doesn't mean you have to hire somebody that has a specific major unless that's what you need. Like if you need an engineer that does something specific, then that's a little different. But there's all kinds of students out there that can come in that want to learn and have this sort of apprenticeship style, which Adam, you're really talking about, is learning the craft and asking lots of questions, which this generation, in my opinion, is very good about asking questions. Everybody always has to get better at that. But I find that the students I interact with do ask lots of questions. And I think that's actually an opportunity for a leader to think through, how can I expand our brand, how we think about bringing talent in, who we want, and allow opportunities for more senior people at the firm to become mentors, essentially, which is also a great learning opportunity. I talked to a lot of mentors in my career who say, I learned more than I think my mentee did, because I really learned about how to mentor. And so I think there's a lot of value in there from just having all kinds of generations and, diversity of thought. And that's partly coming in with the junior talent.
Do you think reverse mentoring is something that's also that should happen?
Reverse mentoring. I mean, I think that comes with the mentor relationship, mentor-mentee relationship. I think if you have a good relationship, it's hard. Sometimes mentors and mentees don't work well together, but the ones that do, I think they absolutely work back and forth in an organic aspect. And I do think it's very valuable. And I think mentors learn a lot because you think about how you speak to somebody, how you're helping them grow, what you can learn from them. Yeah, absolutely.
I must say that when you say the word internship, that strikes terror into my heart.
That's that fear.
Yes, it's simply not because young people are coming in, but because of how these young people often these days are exploited. If you're going to come and work in my company, you'll be rewarded for working in my company because that's reasonable. I'm going to have high expectations of you. I'm going to ask you to behave a certain way and give me your time from start of the day to the end of the day. For me to say you're not going to be paid for that is obscene, isn't it? And
absolutely. Sorry, the sun has decided to come out.
Yeah. Well, go on. Draw the blinds if you need to.
Yeah.
But we see it so much these days, don't we? Where it's like the company are using slave labor and getting work for nothing, believing that the learning is enough. And actually, these are often people that are saddled with huge debts, having been through college, and then to ask them to continue to support themselves whilst you're monetizing them, I think it's just revolting behavior.
And I would say that most internships are paid these days, not all. And I think that absolutely is unfair if they're not paid. I totally agree with you. And in fact, there's a governing body called NACE, which is the National Association of College and Educators, I believe I said correctly, in the United States at least, where they have a big campaign out there right now saying, you need to pay for your interns. And I think that really speaks to more probably the nonprofits, startups, some of the worlds that just don't have that. And I agree with you. You absolutely need to be paid. And it shouldn't be in college credit, which therefore the students have to pay for. But when you think about some of the bigger firms like in tech, investment banking, financial services, consulting, marketing, CPG, they typically pay pretty well. And so but that is also a budgetary restriction. I think that's another reason why companies might say, I don't want an intern because it's just more money. It's expensive to recruit them and then have them pay for them. And that has to be a part of our budget.
I
And
wanted
one of
to
the things,
get to one of the comments that was shared. William Shorten, hi Will, says
Will.
so much comes down to mindset and attitude of both existing employees and new joiners. The most benefit you get from a new starter in the first 6 months, it's when they are still seeing things through new eyes and can bring new insight. We agree. Thank you for that, Will.
Really good
I'm
point.
sorry, Tracy. What were you saying?
this brought up another question for me, and I think maybe fear people have is that, like, Adam had interns. He ended up hiring his interns. What if you don't have the budget to keep somebody after? Is that unfair? Like, because I feel I don't hire people right now, but if I did, I feel like if I was going to have an intern, I would want there to at least be the possibility of them continuing their employment. And I feel like internship also by nature is supposed to be kind of date stamped. So if you're doing it for like a summer for college students, then it kind of makes sense because you're expecting them to go back to school. You're not expecting them to need full-time employment. But what are some thoughts that you have on people who are maybe experiencing that from a company perspective?
Sure. Yeah, this is where campus recruiting is tough because you have to think about your head count sometimes 2 years in advance. So I used to recruit, so investment banking, this is how insane this is. You hire 15 months in advance of the internship. So I hire students their sophomore spring for them to come like 15 months later for that summer. And then I have to know the head count for a year after that. So almost 2.5 years later. Not everybody does that. And that's really hard for some companies to be able to predict that head count. So in that perspective, there's a couple of things that you can do to still be able to have an internship, but also allow a student to go get that full-time job. So there's internships you could offer to somebody after their first year or their sophomore summer. Those summers tend to be places where there aren't enough internships out there. And I think if you are definitely open and transparent and saying, listen, we just want to give you a summer experience, but we just don't have the capacity to bring you back full time, or we don't know if we have that capacity yet. So we want to have you much earlier in your college career so that you can go off and get an internship. And we think this internship is going to help you get that job you want. And then let's get you to stay in touch with us because maybe there's an opportunity a year after graduation and things like that. So I agree with you. The internship really should be leading you to a full-time role. So you just need to be open and say, you're not eligible for that. So let's think about other ways for us to be unique in that perspective. So both the student gets value and you get value out of them.
Yeah, which I think is important because one of the things I've been realizing right now is how many industries exist that I didn't know existed when I was in college.
Yes.
And it would have been like super helpful. Like I went to business school. So yeah, it's the investment banking companies, the management consulting companies, the big telecoms, those types of things that have available internships. And that's what I did, right? I went and worked for the telecom. But like now I've realized like locally, there's a very big like space industry, which is crazy. And I would have loved to know that, right? But if these types of companies aren't offering internships, then people don't know that the industry exists either. So I think from a branding perspective, there's a lot of opportunity for companies to share that. Did you know what's happening in agritech? This, right? For a business student, because no, I probably don't know what's happening in agritech and I might be interested in that.
I mean, I absolutely, the brand awareness is huge because even if it's not something that you can give right away, like an internship, maybe it's something that someone's going to think about 3 years down after graduation or 8 years, or maybe they go get an MBA. I mean, coming in and just maybe doing a class with a professor is a great way to get exposure if you just don't need to have this internship. And career fairs used to be the thing we would go to, 20 some odd years ago when I was in college, but the career fairs, and they still exist. And I know people use them. So no, if that works for you, great. But I never saw a lot of success with that. And so it's a lot of effort to go in and really have to have these events to get students to get to know who you are, particularly in maybe more niche areas or new companies or small things that aren't like the cool, sexy things that places that you want to work as they use that terminology.
So
I
I've got
wanted to share Andrew's comment. Andrew
Yeah.
Slester writes, there are always people that are willing to share knowledge in any field they work in.
Yeah.
It is getting those people to the front of any organization to show any new starts that the company they have joined is willing to pass on the knowledge they need
Good
to
point.
grow within the company.
Mhm.
Excellent point. Thank you, Andrew.
Mhm.
So
Sorry, Alex.
well, I guess it's related to that point. I was going to ask Joanna what tips you might have, or actually, no, not what tips, but what's your view if you've got different generations within an organization and you've got leadership, believing in one way of leading, which let's say, quote unquote, is traditional. And then you've got the younger generation expecting a degree of change. Should leadership be proactively, changing the way that they communicate with the younger generation? Or should they accept that the younger generation are going to have new ideas and there's going to be new blood coming through and they just need to be more receptive and listen to what's coming through?
I would say the latter. I don't know that anybody needs to change how they communicate. It's really hard to ask somebody, in their 70s or 80s, for example, to have to communicate like through Slack if that's just not how they're ever going to be successful.
Yeah.
But I do think every generation and at every point in your career journey, I think it's so important to be open to new ideas. Sometimes it can be frustrating and you have to have the timing correctly, because sometimes if you're not in the right mindset to accept the feedback and the questions, it's not going to go over very well. But for the most part, I think leadership has such an opportunity with people coming in and giving their perspective, because I think that leads to broader conversations. It's not just, okay, well, thank you for your questions. It's also, I'm, really intrigued by why you're saying that, but also this is why we do it this way. Let me talk you through the bigger picture. Let me educate you in how we've been able to do things so that you have a better understanding and therefore it helps your job. So I think it kind of opens up to that mentorship, right? Or the apprenticeship that we talked about, those kinds of elements. And it's got to be a two-way street too. And I do think any generation, even myself, I would love to sit down with a senior leader and ask questions.
Yeah, which is when I listen to you speak there, Joanna, I'm thinking, well, that's more transparent leadership. It's more transformational leadership. That's what leaders, in my mind, should be.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Corinne Meyer shares, and Joanna, I'm curious to get your take on this. She has 2 points. We'll bring them both up. First, she starts, however, today with social media creating so much exposure for startups like space and agritech, students should be reaching out as well. Is it just me? And then she goes on to say, and to Andrew's point, you simply have to use LinkedIn appropriately and you can find your way into any which organization by sending some messages. So to that broader point, how should students be using social media to leverage that next opportunity? And conversely, in your opinion, how should organizations and people within those organizations be using social media to facilitate that career opportunities within their organization?
Yeah. So there are a number of platforms that companies, particularly in the US, use, and I'm sure there's something similar in the UK, for example. So Handshake is a place where a lot of schools, it's just the platform where they post all of their jobs. And so that's the first way that a student can go and see what school, all the jobs that their school has accepted. LinkedIn is a great tool, particularly for students when I consider them to be either at a non-target school, i.e. a school where maybe a lot of companies may not visit, or they're looking for something that's very niche. So to use your examples, space or agritech that are in the startup space, you do need to be a lot more savvy and you do need to kind of do your research. And I talk to a lot of students about that. You need to go out, figure out what you want to do, figure out the best companies that do that in a wide range. You don't just look at 5. You've got to open up that net. And then you need to do some of this outreach, and that outreach should be things like, who are the alumni that you're already connected to, who are maybe from your high school or your current college, or maybe the town you grew up in. We all have different unique connections over time. See if you can utilize that, because what Andrew said was earlier, saying we can all, anybody's willing to talk to you, and I think that's right. If somebody approached me, I'd give you 10-15 minutes, but you also need to come prepared with questions about what you want to learn, and see if there are opportunities. There aren't always internships everywhere or jobs, but you can certainly get something out of that informational call that then might lead you to the next person to speak to or company to research. And so from that perspective, I think social media is helpful. I think when you look at Twitter or X, and you look at Instagram, those kinds of social media, not every company is on there, not every company uses it, so that's a little more limiting.
Should they be?
I go back and forth. I think there are certain companies where it's important for them. I can see why marketing companies and certain companies that are out there for that brand awareness, but I do know that there's a lot of these older organizations where they've got a lot of compliance issues, and there's a liability in that. And so I can understand why they may not be out there. And I've seen where that hasn't gone very well, particularly in financial services. So not sure I recommend that.
But I'm interested to get your view, actually, Joanna, as a HR consultant. I provide social selling training, and when speaking to HR, they have a specific view about whether or not employees should be using social media. Do you have a view on whether or not they should or shouldn't? Is there, should there be a policy in place? Should you give employees the freedom to develop their personal brand on social media?
Probably, it's a really good question, because I think we're kind of entering into a world where social media is taking over in a good, I think there's a lot of positive to social media. But I also think with AI becoming much more prevalent and going to continue to be, I think there's a lot of caution that we all want to bring with that. So I might put policies around that, because it would be horrible to think that maybe you started doing some brand and then maybe some sort of AI bot gets created and then it's doing something that isn't you. And so I could see that going down the wrong route. But I do think having things around LinkedIn, I was always very conservative about it, but I don't think I had to be. That wasn't necessarily as dictated by my employer. But I could have absolutely been out on LinkedIn regularly saying, here are all my events. These are all the things I'm going to. Hey, students that follow me. That was kind of exhausting. So it was like one more part of my job I just didn't want to do. But I think a policy is probably very smart in a way of just providing some guardrails around the types of things we would be comfortable with you posting, because you are representing a company that you work for that you don't own.
Could you put up Corinne's comment, Rob, please?
The most recent,
Yes.
This one?
Yeah.
Mhm.
She says, thanks. Also, I did an interview with the general counsel of Ohio Northern University. She told me that they changed their social media policies for employees, that they want to motivate the staff to connect with the students to help them reach these opportunities via LinkedIn.
That's great.
I also know a lecturer in the Boston area who live streamed all his lectures.
Oh.
He was doing a marketing course, weren't you, Rob? And you
Yes.
your
Yes.
lecture.
Yes, I do try and incorporate social media into the curriculum. I believe that the students know how to use it. It is the organizations, and again, I emphasize the people within the organizations that can benefit from understanding that. That to me is a great way to facilitate the conversation between both parties. And it's not necessarily a here's our company, here's all of our wares, do you want to buy some type of approach? It's just, here's where we fit in the world. Here's what we are doing. Here's our stance on sustainability. for a marketing organization, for example. So why would a marketing organization want to speak about sustainability? They don't necessarily. They just want to talk about day in the life at their organization and the things that they believe, because it's my understanding anyway that this up and coming generation cares as much about things beyond the scope of the dollars and cents, and they care about the culture, they care about the beliefs of the organization. So you want to convey that, especially for those lesser known brands, those startups that have no brand reputation, or that fourth largest competitor in the marketplace. Well, nobody's going to send the resume to the 14th largest one. Maybe they need to put themselves out there a little bit more. So that's where I see opportunities for organizations to really get a leg up on campus recruiting by starting their publicity campaign, if you will, by speaking to the people that they want to attract about the things that those people are interested in. Thanks for that.
I think this brings up something else for me too, because when we look at this concept of being social, and I know when, at least on this show, we talk about social media, we talk about it from a being social point of view. The different generations have a different way of being social. So similar to how Adam was talking about, my definition of hard work is not the same as your definition of hard work. If our definitions of being social are different, and we just say, go out and be social. We ask the students to go out and be social, and their way of being social is using TikTok. And my way of being social is going to have coffee with somebody. Then innately we're running into a problem, because while it's not a bad idea to recommend that people go out and be social, we don't have the same ways of being social. And that is also within demographics, we have that problem too. Introverts and extroverts define social activities differently. There's lots of different ways that people experience being social. And so if we're looking at this from a connection point of view, connecting students to companies, connecting students to opportunities, creating opportunities in organizations. What do we do with that? How do we broach the subject of, we really want people to be social, but we also need to give people the space to be social in their way and maybe create a new way of being social together?
I've got a training program for that, Tracy.
So, Joanna, we started this. I put you right on the hot seat to begin with, saying, why aren't more organizations doing it? And I had no intention of putting you on the hot seat, but you came up with a great answer, and I appreciate it. And the long and the short of it was fear of the unknown. Mm-hmm. So let's get back to that then. What are the first steps in establishing a successful campus recruiting program?
So a couple of things I think is very helpful. One, you need to figure out, what is this internship going to be? What is this going to look like? And will it convert to a full-time? And I would say that an internship is the best way to start from a campus recruiting perspective. I think it's easy to say, oh, I'll just hire somebody when they graduate. But the advantage of the internship is that sort of try before you buy situation, where you really get anywhere between 8 and 10 weeks with someone. Maybe it's longer if it's a co-op program, where you get to assess them, whereas they also get to assess you. So I do think the internship has a lot of value. And then you got to figure out, what is that internship role going to look like? What's the type of work that we would ask them to do? And making sure it's real work. It's not just some projects that are not helpful or not applicable to what the job is. You really need to get them to sit in on meetings. They need to understand the type of work. They need a workflow. So those are the things you have to commit to. And then you think about, okay, now how do I find the right people to sit in these seats? And, if you can get at least 2 interns, I think that's great. It's always hard for one intern to be by themselves and be successful. I think 2 is always a great way to start. So if you can do 2 and you afford that, I think that's a great way to start.
Yeah.
And so
I'll save it.
Okay. I was going to say that the next step would be, okay, now where do I find these students? So you might have some great colleges who are local to where you are right now. So obviously, if you're in New York City, there's a ton of options. But even if you're in Cleveland or you're in Denver or wherever, there are local schools that you can start to market to. That's one way to start. You could also look at your college. You're an alumni of a school likely. Where did you go to school? Could you work with that career services to post? And then lastly is to get yourself known. So we talked about the brand awareness a little bit earlier. It's really, how can you get in front of some of these students? So is it going on campus and hosting an event? Maybe it's networking. Maybe it's working with a professor to do a class with them so they understand what you do. I think that's a really effective way. Or you do a case study on campus so that students understand the type of work. And then you build on those relationships and keep up with those students ultimately to your interview process. And so that beginning framework seems like a lot to do, but you can scale that very quickly if you need to. Whether you're hiring one person or 30, that is about the same. And it's kind of the amount of schools that you go to just changes. So it's just that initial structure that can be a little exhausting.
As you were talking about that, I immediately went to thoughts on costs and ROI. And I don't want to put you on the spot. If you know, great. If you don't, I'll do some research. But
that's why people sign up to be a guest, right?
That's right. My gut is telling me that the cost for recruiting through an internship is significantly lower than the cost for recruiting cold. Again, that 14th largest competitor in the marketplace posting an opening for their entry line role in a company that nobody's heard of and a job that nobody's applying for, versus, and all the costs that go with it. Do you have any insights on the costs of recruiting for a permanent placement versus recruiting for an internship?
So I would say that recruiting for an internship has definitely a cost. I think it just depends on what you want to do. Our recruiting budgets were huge in the sense because I was hiring so many people and we were going to so many places and hosting events. And if you're in that world, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars. But if you are just starting out or that's not really in your budget, there is an expense, right? Because you are trying to attract the right people. You want to make sure you take them out, you get to know them. And then it's also an expense in the internship because yes, you're selling them to sign up for the internship, but you're also selling them in the internship so that they'll come back full time. So there's that true expense. I think that's better value for your money. If that's probably the better way I would say it, versus kind of just hiring cold, like you mentioned, where you might post it a number of places, maybe use a headhunter and you hire somebody where they're kind of an unknown quantity. They may or may not do very well. They may not last very long at the company. And, that kind of a cost is much higher to the company because they may not be a long-term employee and therefore you have to start all over again. So I think that's the difference in how you spend your money.
That makes huge sense to me because if I've been in a part of a lot of organizations who are like pretty consistently hiring, and the cost of posting, the cost of working with headhunters, the cost of turnover, like the turnover we used to see in that scenario was so high. We would have the number of people we hired for 3 months in a permanent role and then didn't continue with. You really should have just structured that as an internship. That would have made a lot more sense. Yeah, anyway, my brain is just going like, duh. So thank you for sharing that because I'm sure some other people are thinking that too.
Absolutely.
So what metrics or indicators do you use to gauge the success of a recruiting program?
So I would say the first year, it's really hard to have these metrics, right? What you can look at is how many people applied to your job and how many came into your interviews and how many were hired. But year on year, what you'll start to be able to see is patterns and trends around where you're getting most bang for your buck, types of students from certain schools, that are coming and applying for your jobs? How many more interviews are you offering? How many more internships are you offering? That's going to give you a lot of information. It's also going to help steer your strategy a little bit of like, where are you having more success? So maybe the school down the street doesn't work for you. So maybe that's a place where we just post, but we're going to lean in, and we're going to go into these 3 schools that we're really excited about, and we're prepared to spend more money on it. But because we're able to do that, because I have the metrics that show we've had much more success in hiring from these certain schools. And as these students come back full time, they become your ambassadors for those schools as well. So you start having an easier pipeline, and that helps your strategy until it doesn't work. And then you may have to pivot over time. So that's a lot of the ROI, and certainly your conversion from intern to full-time is your biggest metric to be able to watch, assuming that that's something you're able to offer, right? Is that full-time job. That's the biggest converter. If you give out 2 offers and they don't accept the full-time, that's a big red flag that something didn't work in your internship, and you need to figure out what happened.
So with the rise of remote work, how has campus recruiting evolved?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think students are now probably tired-ish of Zoom, but they also appreciate the hybrid opportunities to meet with people. So, having Zoom coffee chats is much more the norm. And I think that's easier on companies. And I think that's easier on students who have a lot going on. I also think it means more companies can come to campus, right? Because they have this remote ability, and maybe there's one time that they'll invite people to meet with you live. Maybe they invite you to the office, or, someone's in town so they can host something. I do believe a hybrid strategy is your best bet if that's what you need to do, if you need to have a lot of remote, but you can do remote only. Just make sure that you're on video and that they see you're a real person and you see they're a real person.
So how does that work then? Because I have always thought that when you first join an organization, there is that initial ramping up when you have the excitement and you're meeting people, and you're kind of, as somebody that works within the organization, it's easy for you to say, well, you just send Tim a message on Slack and then you jump on Google Teams with him or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, if you know that, you know that. But actually, I've just started at your company. I'm 20 years old or 23 years old or whatever it is. This is my first experience of the workplace. I'm sitting at home in the dining room at my parents' house, and I'm alone. I've no idea what I'm supposed to be doing. I've no idea who I'm supposed to be engaging with. I haven't got anybody that I can follow. If I come and work for you, Joanna, I can follow you around into meetings and things. I can kind of learn from watching you do. I can't do that. I have to actively message you saying, I'm supposed to be working in a team which is aligned to your team. I haven't got anything specifically I want to talk to you about, but is it all right if we have a talk? And you say, no, I'm really busy. Go away. So how does that work in the modern workplace with remote working and hybrid working? How do you take these people that are lost souls and integrate them into your organization?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that everybody got tested right during COVID about that. I mean, it was really hard. I ran 2 internships 2 summers in a row where, these investment bankers were in their parents' basements, and that's tough. But I think there are things that you can put in place to make sure that somebody feels like a member of the team. It's not perfect, and it has to be constantly worked on, but your onboarding experience is huge. You need to know when you're getting into the company, this is what you do, this is who you can speak to, maybe assign a mentor to this person, and a buddy being somebody who's maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years in advance of you. So they can ask you all the silly questions like, where are these documents? I can't find them. How do I use this system? All those kinds of things, because that's got to be your way to connect with people. And then those mentors and buddies really should be tasked with making sure that you, as the new hire, get exposed to as many people as possible. Let me introduce you to such person. Let's make sure you meet. And it is a lot of work, but it's the only way to make sure that somebody feels like a team member, so you aren't so isolated. Like you said, it's your very first job, and it is easier to be in person, and I would always recommend that. But that's not how every company operates anymore. So the onboarding and the continued onboarding of that new hire is so important. It can't just be 1 week. It's got to be 6 months.
Rob, could you bring Corinne's comment up, please? Because
Absolutely.
Thanks up what Joanna just said.
Mm-hmm. No.
No, the one before that.
Oh, I thought we had covered this one. Oh, no. She says it doesn't work very well. No offense, unless the company has a real proficient virtual onboarding program.
Well, and I would even say, like, it gives you the opportunity to test how good your onboarding program is in general. Because like one of the companies I used to work for did the like peer buddy, and that was in person, but we did the peer buddy and it worked really, really well. And there was a defined role of what your job is as a buddy coming in. Like, this is like you help people find files. You touch base with people daily to see if there's someone they need to be introduced to. There was like a pretty well-defined structure for that. And it helped get people embedded into the organization. And these are types of things where I think there's more opportunity for companies to look at, okay, what do we do in real life that works very well? And how can we create something from a virtual perspective that can achieve the same thing? And there's probably some testing and there'll be things that don't work. But if you have the intention of doing that because you want to have a remote workforce, then that's another area where from a company perspective, you need to invest time, effort, and energy. Is how am I going to help a fully remote intern understand that they want to work here? And how do I help me understand that I want them to work here? What kind of access do I need to them? How do I need to talk to them? How do I need to measure their engagement and all of these different things? And I think sometimes, especially from an intern perspective, because an internship may have a defined end date on it, that we're just like, oh, an intern is here. Okay. Hi, intern. Here's some work for you to do. And I'm like, is that meeting our goal?
Rob.
Yeah.
Joanna, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for being a part of it. How can people get in touch with you?
Well, I'd love to chat with anybody. They can find me on LinkedIn under Joanna Walker at Point HR Consulting, or you can email me at joanna@pointhrconsulting.com. I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. This has been another edition of the Digital Download. If you have something to say, we want to hear from you. You can find us at digitaldownload.live under the Be Our Guest section, or you can scan the QR code on screen. For those of you listening on radio, you can't scan the QR code on screen.
Come join us on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. For Joanna, for Adam, for Alex, Tim, Tracy, and myself, I want to thank everyone for being an active part of today's episode. And until next time, thank you all, and we'll see you again.